The Vice President, J.D. Vance, spoke to Fox News yesterday, where he made some comments that have caused some offence. Let's have a listen, first of all, to what he said.
If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The security guarantee and also the economic guarantee for Ukraine is to rebuild the country.
What's been the reaction to that so far at Westminster?
Well, really striking, vociferous reaction, especially from Conservative MPs who perhaps feel more licensed to speak out, given they're not part of the governing party. We've heard from James Cartledge, who's the Shadow Defence Secretary, saying NATO Article 5, which is where one NATO member must come to the defence of all, says has been invoked just once, the day after 9/11 by America. He says Britain and France came to their aid, deploying thousands of personnel to Afghanistan, including my own brother and numerous parliamentary colleagues. And he went on to accuse J.D. Vance of being deeply disrespectful. Similar from Ben Obisi-Jekti, another Conservative MP, says, I was part of British forces fighting in highly kinetic operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. The disrespect shown by the new US Vice President to the sacrifices of our service personnel is unacceptable. Now, worth noting, Joe, just in the last few moments, we've had J.D. Vance seeking to clarify what he said. He said the suggestion that he was talking about the UK and France is, in his words, absurdly dishonest. I don't even mention the UK or France in the clip, he says, both of whom have fought bravely alongside the US over the last 20 years and beyond. But let's be direct, there are many countries who are volunteering support who have neither the battlefield experience nor the military equipment to do anything meaningful. I think that clarification will probably take a bit of the heat out of this, stop it from escalating into a real diplomatic spat which would require the government to step in. But I have to say, given only the UK and France have publicly committed the possibility of troops to Ukraine, it is hard to see who else J.D. Vance was referring to.
Well, we're hoping to speak to Ben Obisi-Jekti later on in the programme following his remarks in that tweet. Henry Zeffman, thank you very much. But picking up from that, are you offended by what J.D. Vance said?
After what we saw on Friday, I actually raised it in the Parliament yesterday, there's a difference between decent and deceit is one letter, but actually the gap is the true measure of someone's character. And I think we need to have some decency in the way in which we treat each other. My worry is that we're living through social media where everything goes on social media. We have to be able to say hurty words. We have to be able to have frank conversations. Whether it's right to do it in the public interest, I'm pleased J.D. Vance clarified his position. And yes, people will be offended. They rightfully fought, we fought alongside the Americans on that basis. But we need calm heads and take the heat out of some of this argument rather than get in the tit for tat, because quite literally, the word security is at stake here.
Right, but random countries that haven't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. I'd like to know which countries he was actually talking about there, Natalie. I mean, do you understand why these Conservative MPs are upset?
I understand the sacrifice that our troops made, their families made, their children made. We were there, we were allies of the US, and that was absolutely the right thing to do, and I'm thrilled that we've got the clarification.
Right. Do you think that's enough of a clarification, Claire?
Well, I am worried, as Luke says, if we start behaving as though we're easily offended by something that somebody said and overreact. I think that is a danger, because I think the thin-skinned nature of the Trump regime and the way that J.D. Vance behaved, being thin-skinned, I don't want to imitate that. I also think it's worth... So, if it's a clarification, fine. I'm sure that it was misspoken, completely wrong, but it's a reminder, by the way, of Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, before we all say Afghanistan are brave troops, that's fine. Can we also remember what a debacle Afghanistan and Iraq were, right? And the reason I'm saying that is because we're now talking about military interventions. We're talking about gathering troops together. We won't necessarily have the backup of the US, it seems. I think that any Labour leader has to remember Iraq. We have to remember that Afghanistan was less than glorious. The sacrifices of those troops were actually very contentious. The Iraq war was not one, I'm going to say...
But what's your comparison then in terms of Ukraine? I mean, you've said because we don't have enough troops, perhaps, to make those commitments in the first place. But are you actually saying we shouldn't actually do it?
No, actually, the very opposite of that. I think that the way to go, if there is a way to go, is to support Iraq. To support Ukraine in its self-defence. It's they that have fought this war so brilliant. I mean, God, with ingenuity, courage in a way that none of us could imagine. And they need to be given a way of seeing through the defence of their own sovereignty. Now, the reason I'm emphasising that is because I don't think I'm worried about the kind of troops on the ground being a posture and not necessarily a helpful one. But in order to get the support that we need to give Ukraine, we are going to have also have a conversation with the UK public.
Yeah, so just to quickly touch on Vance's comments, I would say it's not just about being thin-skinned. I think it's the message it sends to Russia, to anybody who is considering being hostile to the UK or to Europe. If the US and the UK are kind of talking about each other in this way, as your correspondent pointed out, it's hard to know who else Vance was talking about, given only the UK and France have said they'd commit troops.